666.
Richard, my one big thing this week, Saudi Arabia is sort of looking eastward to Asia. Asia is looking right back. A couple storylines that just tie into a big old mashup like we like to do usually for our newsletter for sustg.com. But just a lot going on here. First, MBS and several ministers, officials from the public and private sector are currently on a days-long visit to Asia. Started with Indonesia earlier this week, where the G20 held its summit for 2022. Really, again, we love plugs, and we're sorry to do so many of them, but our newsletter for sustg.com/the review daily newsletter has so much good coverage of this this week. Just makes it so easy for you to digest it and see it. Check that out. Pretty interesting declaration, Richard, that was mentioned at the end of the summit. A good piece from CNN. We included, sort of recapped it all, but strong language in there condemning the war in Ukraine. Leaders agreed on a 17-page document. Major victory for the U.S. And its allies, who have who have pushed to end the summit with a very strong condemnation of Russia, which is, of course, one of the members of the G20 who almost certainly did not want this in, and they had their stated disagreements with it. The statement said that there was definitely a rift among member states, but sort of a big deal that got included. After the G20, MBS flew with his entourage of officials and business leaders to South Korea. There was a blitz of deals between the kingdom and Seoul. Blitz of deals, Richard. I've seen that. I've never seen blitz of deals, but I sort of like that as football season. So really cool. But there really was a blitz of deals between Saudi Arabia and South Korea. 30 billion at least in total, according to some reports. Some reports have that higher, but just to name a few, $7 billion expansion of the Shaheen Petrochemicals refinery in South Korea, Aramco's biggest investment there. South Korea's industry ministry, which I'm reading now, and that's a funny combination of words, industry ministry, said companies including Samsung C&T Corp, POSCO Holdings had signed over 20 agreements with Saudi counterparts in fields such as energy cooperation, railways, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, gaming. Additionally, Korea Electric Power Corp, KEPCO, 4 other Korean firms signed an MOU with Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund to build and operate a hydrogen and ammonia production plant in the kingdom. A company source told Reuters at about 6.5 billion. And we'll come back to green hydrogen here in Yella, Richard. On the G2G level, Crown Prince MBS and South Korea's President Yoon Suk Yeol held a bilateral meeting. And the South Korean president said he hoped the two nations can expand cooperation. So really a strong visit from MBS. There's the Saudi Korean trade event today put on by the Ministry of Investment. What I find interesting about this, Richard, I was doing a little research on this whole visit. A report from Yonhap News Agency, which is South Korea based, from October said that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman had shelved plans to visit South Korea. So that was 6 weeks ago. And now it's back on, and now there's all these deals going on, which is interesting. And then lastly, Richard, throwing this in the mix, and I don't want to bury the lead, but we do ask Robert a little bit about this at the end, but China's President Xi Xinping is expected to visit Saudi Arabia at the end of this year. You sort of have both Prince Faisal bin Farhan, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and his predecessor, Adel Al-Jubeir, hailing the historical and solid relationship between Beijing and Riyadh. It's really interesting, Richard, because I haven't really seen historical relationship with Saudi-China used as much as it is used now. I mean, that may be drawing a little bit too much out of this, but Saudi-Chinese relations really began in 1990. So it's historic in that I'm historic as a 37-year-old, but and now part of the older half of the world. But just
and that
interesting.
Makes me prehistoric.
Just interesting. There is a lot going on between Saudi and Asia, especially this week, and then in general. Just wanted to kind of wrangle it all together here, but just an interesting time.
I think that's a good wrangle, and I don't have a lot to add to it. It is, other than it's curious to watch MBS nowadays, and it's also interesting to look at it in the context of the current sort of not beef, but misunderstanding with the U.S. or recalibration with the U.S. and that Saudi Arabia is looking to be seen as an independent power. And it's, you really see it here when you look at this. Consider MBS as a reality right now. He's in Indonesia, Jakarta, for the G20, of which Saudi Arabia is the only Arab member. Very prestigious. He is now traveling about, engaging in diplomacy as the prime minister of Saudi Arabia. And we've talked about this, beginning sort of with the Al-Ula Declaration in January 2021, and followed by, a whole slew of high-level meetings, involving MBS, including the U.S., UK, France, Russia, Turkey, Egypt, and soon China. It's there's a weight now, and for many people there was anyway. But I mean, there's clearly a weight. The prime minister of Saudi Arabia is rolling up in South Korea and overseeing $30 billion worth of deals, many of them very critical. $7 billion, close to $7 billion investment on Aramco. I mean, this commitment to come do a green hydrogen plant, with South Korean impetus and investment on the East Coast, the Gulf side. Looking at a 2029, turnkey. So it's a different world, I think, and again, as we've talked about before, the Saudis see themselves differently, and certainly there is a weight as MBS to MBS's diplomacy now that there wasn't 2 years ago.
Yeah, and if you think about it, I mean, South Korea, what, 12th in the world in total GDP. I mean, they're huge. They're absolutely massive. And they are leaders in spaces that Saudi Arabia is very interested in attracting and partnering with. But that's just a really good point, Richard, about Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman being head of state now. It does add that extra weight and that extra gravitas. I mean, I didn't think about that. That's a really good point. I mean, he's now, and this is not his first trip as head of state, but it's his first trip to Asia as head of state. And and his first G20 as head of state. So yeah, very, very interesting time. South Korea, I mean, a leader at Samsung, technology, energy. We've talked a little bit about power and US-Saudi energy cooperation on the nuclear front, Richard, and how because of 123 agreements and other issues, the US is going to miss out on chances in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere. South Korea doesn't have the same problem, and they're almost certainly getting involved with that. Green hydrogen is another thing. So there's enormous amount of potential there. And so, yeah, very interesting. Richard, what do you think? Shall we get to our awesome conversation with Robert Mogilnicki, who is just
Absolutely.
so good,
He'll
very
give
talented?
us, what have we talked about? We've talked about, global population and major diplomatic initiatives in Asia. Robert will continue this global approach and give us further insight.
Enjoy.